Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our fifth of 5 programs on science and consciousness. This is a milestone day for Humanity Rising, and I think also for academia and world history in a way, because we want to announce as we begin our program that the training for UFO awareness and ET communication is now live on the Ubiquity University website and the new Paradigm Institute website. This is the first ever academic program in extraterrestrial studies, and you are all invited to take the courses and learn what the human race now needs to know about the history of UFOs, now called UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, after nearly 80 years of secrecy and top-level classification and the marginalization of UFO evidence and awareness with such success that until very, very recently, if you talked about UFOs, you were considered a little bit crazy. And that was all part of a cover-up orchestrated by the Central Intelligence Agency of the US government, working with governments around the world to keep all the evidence about the presence of extraterrestrials on Earth from the public, as the militaries working with defense contractors have been very busy seeking to reverse engineer ET technology for weaponization. But today, the cat is out of the bag, and we are launching an unprecedented training program that will answer 2 fundamental questions that the world now needs to know. Number 1, what are the facts about extraterrestrials? What's the history? What's the law? What's the politics? What's the technology that they have been bringing to planet Earth? And there's going to be a certificate program that you can all take, provided by the new Paradigm Institute on these matters. What is the hard evidence that we can now take as given about this phenomenon? The second question is, who are these beings? How do we communicate with them? We have evidence going back to the 1970s that the Central Intelligence Agency began to realize that the best way to understand the UFO phenomenon, and in fact to communicate with the extraterrestrials, was through remote viewing, because all evidence indicates that they maneuver and control the craft that they use to come to Earth through mental telepathy. Their communication with the various people that have interacted with them isn't through the spoken language, but through mental telepathy. So how can all of us at this moment, when we come into the most extraordinary realization in the history of the human species, that we are not alone, that extraterrestrials exist, they've been on planet Earth for some time, there's evidence, hard evidence of retrieved alien craft and extraterrestrial biological entities. And so how we take all this in and begin this extraordinary new moment, we're launching humanity's extraterrestrial moment and history will never be the same. And so it's with deep humility, but also great satisfaction that Ubiquity University and the New Paradigm Institute launches this training program for all of you to begin the preparation that all of us must now engage in to welcome our cosmic neighbors. So you'll see the links in the chat. We'll be doing a special mailing out to everyone in the Humanity Rising Ubiquity New Paradigm networks over the coming days. There will be press releases. Our first course is going to be on February 22nd with Daniel Sheehan, the president and general counsel of the New Paradigm Institute, who probably knows as much as anyone, having been involved in the UFO issue for nearly 40 years, will be our first faculty, followed by Richard Dolan, the great historian of UFO matters. Those will be the foundational courses upon which the training program will be built. So it's a great day, everyone. Thank you very much. And in this spirit, I would like to welcome my good friend and colleague, Peter Mary, to convene this session, which, as it turns out, synchronistically, as it tends to do with anything associated with Peter, is going to be on ET technologies. So, Peter, thank you so much, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Well, I wouldn't quite go as far as to say ET technologies, but we have a hunch that consciousness plays a big role in ET technologies, and that really as humanity, we have this expression in Dutch, which is, I said yesterday, in the kinderschoenen, in the child's shoes, in terms of exploring this whole domain. But we have two people with us who, have some of the most experience in this whole area. So that's what we're going to explore. This week we've been really looking at both the science and the consciousness of how we communicate non-locally, how we retrieve information non-locally through a field that seems to connect everything. And there's a theme been running through it the whole week, which is all about this needing to experience the sense of interconnectedness, the sense of oneness. And it's when we have that direct experience that the information flows and that we're able to access information outside of the linear time and space that we used to in our materialistic worldviews. And having explored all of that, particularly around the communication aspect, for example, with extraterrestrials or with, as we've talked about, any other species, whether it's plants or the animal kingdom, that can happen through when we go into our interiors and feel that sense of connection and relationship to them, that we get this information flowing both ways. And the piece that we hadn't yet touched on, that is one of the most interesting areas, I think, in what's going to be disclosed around UAPs, is this technology side. And it was fascinating to hear Daz, the remote viewer, on Tuesday talk about how one of the projects he'd been asked to work on, of course, he didn't know when he was given the task, ended up being remote viewing a UFO. And what he discovered about it and the nature of that craft, and how the being that was guiding it was somehow in a symbiotic relationship with it. So it's like the craft was some kind of living entity, and the consciousness of that being was in a relationship with the craft. So it was consciousness driven, but not in a mechanical way, in the sense of, okay, I'm going to think this and then it's going to do something in the craft like that. It's more, when I'm speaking this now, it's like that. The film has now gone out of my head. But it's the one where the blue guys, right? And somebody will put it in the chat in a minute, and they plug their tails in to something, and it kind of connects them to the whole universe. What's the film? There we go, Avatar. Thank you, Shannon. That's the one.
Yeah, Avatar.
Yeah, that's the one. It's that kind, there's some kind of symbiotic relationship going on there. And one of the things that all the research has shown, as you've heard on the first day from Princeton, and then since then that Rollin has been involved in, and through Roger Nelson with the Global Consciousness Project, and Wolf has been involved in building on the Princeton work, is showing that this communication, this information can flow outside of linear time and space, and that all humans have the capacity to do it. You don't have to be like particularly gifted psychic. And as Daz and David said on Tuesday, like playing an instrument, you may have more of an inclination for it, but everybody can learn it, even at the basic level, whether it's like, trying to find your car keys or whatever. So it's exciting today to be able to look at this whole area of technologies, and it's something I've been exploring the last couple of years. And just as you really lean into it, the potential seems immense. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Rollin and Wolf about the work they've been doing, and I'll share a little bit of the latest pieces that I've come across, and then we'll open it up and explore, well, what might this mean for how our technologies here might develop on Earth when we take on board the implications of everything we're finding about the nature of consciousness. So with no further ado, big welcome to Rollin and Wolf. Feel free to turn on your videos and unmute. Great to have you with us. Rollin, of course, who many of you will know from his work at the HeartMath Institute, and Wolf, who's been part of the Wyrd team since the beginning, Wyrd Experience and the research, now Wyrd Technologies, who you might remember was on Humanity Rising after he won the prize from IONS, where they were looking at research that showed how consciousness expands beyond the brain, basically, and the proposal that Wolf was a key part of developing was one of the winners of that prize. So since then, we've been building on that with the development of the technology. So great to have both of you with us. What we're going to do is kick off with Rollin to tell us a bit about the Global Consciousness Project, the technology that's involved in that, and then we'll move on to Wolf. So Rollin, over to you.
Great. Well, thanks, Peter. Great to be back on Humanity Rising. If I remember right, I think I was in one of the very first of this series. So it's awesome to see how long Jim has kept this series going. And I know for a while I actually started all the events with a heart-focused meditation to help get in coherence as a community. Maybe we can bring that back. Let me share some screen share, and we'll talk about the Global Consciousness Project 2.0. Now, did I hear you right that Roger Nelson was already on earlier?
Yeah, he was on earlier this week. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
he covered G. So
no, he didn't really. He was talking more about the Princeton work and touched lightly on it, but don't assume anything about any previous knowledge of GCP and things.
Okay, awesome. All right, here we go. We'll share some slides and get going here. So Global Consciousness Project 2.0 is what I'm going to discuss here today, which is, I think, directly related to the topic, because this is really a kind of I think of GCP 1 and 2 really as a globally distributed scientific instrument. It's kind of how I look at it. And it's really all about a tool, I think, to study human consciousness and how it correlates with changes in what I think of anyway as a field of global consciousness, and how our consciousness and our collective consciousness interacts with the physical world, because these are physical devices that make up this network. And it's a network of random number generators, or RNGs, as we tend to round them off to. And I've found that a lot of people, this seems very mysterious, and what's an RNG and all this. And the way I think of them anyway that works is that they're electronic coin flippers, basically. And if we flip a coin 100 times or 1,000 times, on average, it's going to come up 50 heads, 50 tails, pretty much, and you can try it. However, when you're doing that flipping, you can get a series of maybe I don't know, I've actually have tried this in the past, 8, 10 heads in a row, or tails in a row, or repeating sequences sometimes. That happens even although on average it comes out 50-50. So RNGs basically do this really fast, and instead of heads and tails, it's ones or zeros that come out. So we're doing that many thousands of times a second with the RNGs, and then we're distributing these devices around the world. And I'll talk a little bit more about the number of them and why. In GCP2, we have designed, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment, a completely new random number generator designed by some of the world experts in cryptography, where RNGs are often used, and because it's actually very hard to make it a device that's truly random, where you can't predict the future behavior based on the past activity. And on each of our devices, the RNGs that have been designed for the GCP2 network, there are actually 4 independent RNGs. So it's kind of fascinating to what's actually happening to measure what we call network coherence, this global network of these devices. And this is just kind of an illustration. It's we've taken our best shot at trying to illustrate this, what's actually happening. So on each of the devices, there's 4 RNGs. That's why there's 4 strings of numbers coming down under each one of them. So when we have very high network coherence, of course, it's not as ideal as you see here. What it means is that these devices that are thousands of kilometers or miles apart start flipping ones at the same time, or zeros at the same time in these repeating kind of sequences. Whereas in very low network coherence, that would be on the right side, they're just all random, like you would expect. That would be the expected normal behavior. So there's a correlation, or an excess correlation, that gets somehow that the consciousness field is interacting with the devices and causing this correlated behavior. Hopefully that kind of gives some context of what is happening in the network when we have network coherence. Now, of course, we got to give credit to Roger, who sounds like was on earlier, Dr. Roger Nelson, who started this at Princeton. Actually, Dean Radin was part of the idea of this as well. So Roger and Dean cooked up this idea probably 27 years ago or so now. And many hundreds of events have been analyzed over the last 25 years on GCP1. And what they basically found is that events that usually large-scale events in the media that it cause people to pay attention, but especially feel something. And it's pretty clear that it's emotion that tends to be the primary factor here in these events, positive or negative. But the results now, over looking at 500 what he called formal events, of course, many more have been analyzed, but formal events, meaning they were put in a public registry beforehand, that this is what the event that's going to be studied and how the statistics will be done and published, whether it works or not, and all these types of formal things. So out of those 500 formal events, the statistics now are well over actually a trillion to 1 of odds against chance that this is a real effect. So I don't think there's any doubt that something's happening, even though we don't yet understand all the mechanisms of how our collective consciousness, how and where is interacting with these devices. So the red line is the cumulative effect over these 500 devices, and then the various lines are the significance levels. So maybe back up, sorry. So Roger did approach us about, I don't know, a little over 3 years ago, asking if we would take over GCP1. And actually, to be honest, I resisted it because I knew it was going to be a lot of work and take a lot of time and energy. And we did agree to do it. And well, let me hold that part of the story for a minute. Just to go back to GCP1, and this is frankly my favorite thing that Roger did when you look across the events that he had formally measured. And they had them rated for the level of love and compassion that was involved. So like a global peace day, for example, would be high love and compassion. or some of the larger organized large meditation events, for example, that had a focus on adding love or compassion to the world or to the planetary field, these types of things. That's in the high category that you see here. Medium are events that evoke a lot of emotion, but not necessarily a lot of love or compassion. World Cup, Super Bowls, big sporting events and these types of things, and that category of things. A lot of emotion, but not a lot of love or compassion. Low would be the terrorist attacks, 9/11, these types of things, earthquakes and so on, where it wasn't necessarily the type of emotions. And what he found is that those events that evoke or that have a lot of love and compassion as part of their what they're evoking in the collective have a significantly greater impact on moving the needle, if you will, on affecting adding coherence into the global field environment as detected by the network. Of course, I love this because it really fits really well with our model in the Global Coherence Initiative. That's another story, which this GCP2 is now part of what we call GCI. And we've also looked back now on the long-term effects and to see if there's other correlations. And there are a number of them, actually. And this is what I'm showing you here is what's called solar radio flux. This is a radio signal produced by the sun that has an annual cycle. Well, not an annual, it has a bit of an annual cycle, but an 11-year cycle as well. So we see that correlates quite well with the GCP1 data. And interestingly, the GCP data also tends to track well with various measures of global sentiment or mood or emotion, kind of interchangeable ways of thinking of it. So here's an example of presidential ratings, which actually also track well with other indicators of global sentiment. And it's something we're looking into a lot deeper now. I don't have the slides here, but finding that correlates quite well with the kind of words people are using in Twitter feeds or global news media, these types of things also tends. In fact, current analysis tends to show or suggest that the GCP data slightly precedes the changes in global mood or sentiment. Now, so now switching more to GCP2, one of the factors or issues, and I call it an issue or challenges in GCP1, is you had to really be into it to participate, to be a host for one of our random number generators. In fact, our lab was early on. We've had one running on the back here for many years. It's still part of the GCP1 network, actually. But you had to dedicate a computer to it. You had to really do some coding. I mean, you had to really be into it. And that was, we knew, going to be a challenge for having a much larger, expanded network. So we've started from the ground up and built completely new devices specifically for GCP2. This is what they look like. In fact, I got one here. If I can get the cords long enough to actually show you how big they are. So this is what they look like. They're very thin, very cool looking little devices. I know you, Peter, you've got one, I think, there in your lab as well. And so there's 4 independent RNGs on this. And these are truly state-of-the-art random number generators. And as most modern RNGs, they use quantum tunneling as the source of the randomness. In other words, we try and drive an electron through a barrier it doesn't want to go through, but some through quantum tunneling make it through. And we more or less count or measure the voltage as it comes out. And that's a truly random process of how we, the source of the random numbers that we're then trying to detect. Okay, so that made it very easy because the computers are built in, right? All you have to do is plug them into your Ethernet cable and plug them into power, and once they're connected to the network, that makes it very easy. And our goal is to have 1,000 of these devices, which times 4, right? So 4,000 kind of distributed around the planet. Now, one of the reasons that we want to go with for this many, and GCP1, I think it had at its maximum 70 single RNGs around the world at its height. And looking back across all of the data from GCP1, the both formal and informal events, on the right, you see here, we were able to find and show that there is a correlation between the number of devices in the network and the capacity to detect these kinds of effects, these effects in the global consciousness field. So the more devices, the clearer the effect, the clearer the picture. So as part of the goal to increase the sensitivity of the network is why we chose to go with 1,000 devices. And in GCP2, we did spend a year with a team, of course, Roger and Dean Radin and a bunch of other people and from around the world who were interested in this and had been involved, asking the questions, well, what have we learned from GCP1 and what are the questions that we would like to ask that we can't ask because of the design, and what would it take to ask new questions? And just a few of these questions I think are relevant here. In fact, the most important one to me is, can a smaller group of coherently focused individuals have as large or larger effect on the global network than the masses? Because that's what GCP1 was able to look at. And Roger clearly showed that there is a relationship between the number of people involved, like the media event, these types of things, and the effect size on the network. Are the effects on the consciousness field stronger locally or non-locally? And there's some evidence that smaller events have more local, not necessarily global effects. So we've designed the network to be able to address that question as well. Does intention really matter? Another question I think we will be able to look into a lot deeper. And what is the mechanism? This is a big question, and a lot of the people who criticize GCP2 or GCP1 in general, or a lot of these kind of studies, always say, well, if you don't know the mechanism, we don't believe it. Of course, that's silly, but we've designed the devices so we are actually uploading to the servers data from every stage of the process of making random number generators, including the quantum noise coming right out of the devices that do that. So I think we'll be able to at least address that question in new ways. That's the last one. What's the effect? Are we directly affecting the electrons? Would be one of the questions. Or does consciousness interact at some other stage of the process? All right, so here's just some of the thought I'd show you a few of the results from the network, which is not fully built out yet, but we're way bigger than what GCP ever was already. And this is looking at, we took a stack of devices. So this is actually some work we're doing with Dr. Dispenza, early on in the project. And so we had 10 of these devices in a little stack, so 40 RNGs at one of his events in Florida. And then we also had the beginnings of a network, about an equal number, a little bit more in New York at that time. And so this is looking at a series of meditations. And there's a little under 2,000 people here at this event. Florida is at the event, so we see a building of the effects of the meditations over the 3 days that people were learning the process and getting better at it. But what was really encouraging here is that the network in New York actually has very similar patterns and effects in parallel. So this was really neat to see this. So in this case, it looks like we had both a local and at least a East Coast or somewhat global effect. Now, this is kind of just I thought I'd show you some of the more recent findings. Here we're looking at the beginning and the first 24 hours of the start of the war in Israel and Gaza. So we see a pretty strong and long-lasting effect over many hours here. At least over the first 10 hours or so. And then there's some control periods over here for people that want to see that. Yeah. Okay, now this is an interesting one that gets more to that question is, can a smaller group have an effect? And this is a series of experiments we did with the One Field movie group community. That was a movie produced, I don't know how many years ago, but it's been around a while. And so the ongoing kind of community that's formed around that. So we did a series of monthly meditations. This has a specific thing because we, in this, is on the 21st of each month. The meditations were always focused on leading people into a state of heart coherence. And the intention was always across the really 7, but this is the first 6 of these meditations, to add love and compassion to the planetary consciousness field environment to help lift the baseline consciousness of humanity. That was a common intention across all of them. And in these 6 experiments here, these 6 months, the participants were encouraged to use one of our apps called the Global Coherence app, which actually measures your personal coherence and the coherence level of the community involved at the same time. So we were actually tracking the people as well and how coherent they were from a physiological perspective. And this is the composite of the first six meditation events. And so the gray on top is just control data. And so we see a pretty healthy, strong, significant effect when you look across those 6 events. Because from a research perspective, we always want multiple, events. N of 1 doesn't really mean a whole lot in this, to me anyway. Now, the way this was set up, as I was to reveal the results of the first experiments on the last one, which was kind of the bigger event. And so we also looked at, so now we're just looking at the one event on the 7th month, which was, had a group of people in Jerusalem in this particular case, in person, and then around 2,000 online on Zoom and Facebook and YouTube Live and all that. So it was a pretty big gathering. And also using the Global Coherence app, we had hundreds of people on the app and very high level of coherence. So it was really neat to see that. And you can see here, obviously, when the meditation begins, the effect on the network and how it has a pretty long effect. And the event was about 2 hours. I tell you, I wish they all looked this pretty and this clear. They don't, but it's awesome to see it. So this is really the first experiment that was around this with this many people that we were actually measuring the coherence of the community and the group. So I think we have at least building evidence here that at least the first hypothesis that much smaller groups who are coherent with a shared intention and focus can have pretty large effects on the global consciousness field, which has a lot of implications, I think. So the GCP2 is a citizen scientist project. We invite, the only way we make this possible is from people like you. Actually becoming hosts for devices is one way you can participate as a citizen scientist. But also some other ways, becoming self-scientists, if nothing else, to really sort of tracking what we're feeding the field and helping kind of monitor that and make shifts when we're maybe feeding the field some vibrations that really aren't in that more loving, compassionate perspective. This is I need to update this. This is right now. If you go to the website for the project, there's a spinning globe that shows the dots show the location of the devices, and means we have multiple RNGs on the devices where we actually look at the coherence, if you will, among the RNGs on the board, the 4 RNGs. And so the colors change, in real time to show the coherence at the device level. And we're also doing what we're calling clusters for right now of devices. So if you zoom in on this, what looks like one dot in some areas suddenly scrolls out to be a lot of devices in one area. And those are what we call clusters. And that's to help address the question about the local versus non-local effects. So we have clusters in larger or not, we don't have them yet in all these areas, but are working on that now, in larger cities or areas of special spiritual significance. So something, for example, one is Mexico City. Let's pick that one. There could be events that are very meaningful to people in Mexico, right? But the rest of the world never hears about. So that's why we're doing these clusters all around the world, to really be able to look at the distribution, you know, the effects on the network, local and non-local. And so these are the areas we want to have clusters. So there's ultimately 3 levels of analysis in the network: the device level, the cluster level, you know, of a given area or region, and then also the global network. And so these are the clusters. So if anybody's listening that happens to live in one of these areas, we want half of the network. There's still space for clusters, for devices, to host devices in all of these. The ones with the little dollar symbols are ones that have been funded by external funders. And so basically, if you're interested in being a citizen scientist, here's where you can apply. Go to the website for gcp2.net. And we are managing how many go where. If we didn't, they'd all end up in the US and Europe. We really want them globally distributed. So in the US, if anybody's interested, if you live in New York or LA, those are the 2 cluster cities. In the US, there's still openings there, but the rest of the US is pretty well covered already, or except for Alaska. And thank you. That's really kind of what I wanted to share as a brief introduction to the project.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rollin. I was just thinking on that last point, like, because it maybe the US is saturated, but there may be people in the US who would be happy to sponsor someone in another part of the world.
Absolutely.
That's possible, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, that's the reason we are having to manage it, because, you know, for some people in other countries, the cost of a device, and they are $300, which is very close to our cost to make them. This is not something we make any money on. This is completely a donor-funded project. So donor support is critical, or this wouldn't or couldn't happen.
Yeah, great. So maybe, you know, anyone who knows somebody in other parts of the world, we can put them in touch, and they may not need to pay for it themselves, right? They may need to be, right. Okay, well, that's good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and what really makes things work much better and faster for us in the clusters is when somebody just says, I'll step up and fund the cluster. So that's happened like for South Korea and Spain, and some of these have been that way. So that really makes it helpful. Now, I don't want to make it sound like Peter too. I'm glad you brought that up, because half of the network will be in the cluster is 500, but the other 500 are just distributed anywhere around the world. So you don't have to be in one of those cities I showed to be a host.
Okay, brilliant. Great, thanks for that, Rollin. So, you know, where GCP has been using these random number generators, or random event generators that they're also called, looking at the kind of global level, what Wolf has been developing and working on is, so, you know, how do we use these at, say, group level, when you've got a group in a space together or with a shared intent? How do we track how we are impacting the field of consciousness, or how the field of consciousness is evolving with us, as rather than have it as a more mechanical us impacting something, how it co-evolves with us, with our experience in a space collectively, so that we can get it, you know, literally into the hands of people who are in meeting rooms or boardrooms or retreat centers or sports events, you know, all sorts of possibilities. So it's really exciting how the technology is developing to the point where we can kind of get it out more into the mainstream as well, from the global right down to kind of local events happening. So Wolf, why don't you tell us a little bit about you know, how you've been applying similar technology and some of the results, and then we'll take it from there.
All right. Yeah, so hello. It's a pleasure for me again to speak at Humanity Rising. And I think, of course, what we in Wyrd are doing is very intertwined with the Global Consciousness Project. We have a slightly different angle and approach to it, but I think at a certain time I think both approaches will meet each other. Yeah, so to get a bigger and more detailed picture. So I prepared a short presentation, and I will also show you for the first time something like a live plot from our new software, from the Wyrdoscope, because I think the live software tells us more than my slides I used to explain everything before. So let's start maybe with what I think.
Share it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You see it now, or
No?
Okay.
Share your
Sorry
screen.
for that. 3.
That's it. That's it.
Okay. So now one thing more. Okay. So the title of this slide is what I think we are seeing. So what I would say after now already 3 years of research, what I'm seeing in the data is something like a web of meaning in the field of consciousness. And that's basically our basic setup. So we are measuring local events in a seminar room. And most of my data are from Tantra seminars, from the Integral Tantra, which is based on the framework of Ken Wilber, and traditional and Neo-Tantra in Germany. And what I did is I placed such a setup, one computer with 2 REGs, or random event generators, So at the beginning we used Celerons, but now we also use different ones like 2RNG, which are very similar to the devices the Global Consciousness Project is using. And this setup was placed into a seminar room where people had a Tantra seminar. Not only seminar, but the first 1 year training. So they always met from Wednesday to Sunday. At Saturday was always the main ritual or main event for the group. And the whole training lasted 1 year, and they met for 4 times. And I had the chance to do these measurements there. The people were informed and very enthusiastic about that. And at the beginning, it was just a try. So the beginning was a manual, segmentation of the data. So you have to think. I have 2 REGs. A classical materialist would expect no correlation between the 2 random number event generators. So if you have one REG is Alice, the other one is Bob, so the blue and the green one. These are actually data from the control runs I did in German hotels, so where nothing very special is happening. And you see, okay, Alice and Bob are not correlated. They're not crossing the parabola, which is the border of significance. And I think Rollin explained you in much more detail, actually, what all this means in the presentation before, so I won't go deeper into that. So this is what we would expect if there is, I would say, an average coherence among people. Average mean everyday coherence. And now in the next slide, I will show you what I found. And I found when I saw this data, I was really totally baffled. I never expected that. I never experienced data like this to show up at the Tantra seminar. So on the upper slide, you see the data of the main ritual. And instead of non-correlated data between the 2 REGs, you see just the opposite. You see highly correlated pictures, highly correlated graphs of the 2 REGs. And the second graph was the preparation for the ritual. So they had 1.5 hours before, they had for 45 minutes a preparation for what they did afterwards. And the interesting thing is that these pictures are the pictures I got from my manual segmentation. So you have to imagine I was sitting there in the seminar room. I was commenting what is happening during the seminar. And whenever the leader of the seminar, so that the Tantra teacher said, okay, now something new is starting. I press the segmentation button in the Celeron software. And this is what you see are the pictures of one of the 2 segments I took manually during the seminar. Yeah? So this was at that time done with the original Celeron software. And when I saw these pictures, I thought, okay, this is by far more than I expected. So I'm getting correlated data of the two RHEs. What to do with that? So either I have to see, okay, I will do some control runs in German hotels, but actually to look if also in a control run such pictures would arise, I would have to watch all possible segments which are in the data, which is manual work for years. And so I decided, no, I will program a software to search me for such patterns. And the problem I was facing was, okay, this is now actually the plot of the whole 24 hours of the same day of the charter seminar I showed you before. And inside this data, there are the two pictures I showed you before. And now, of course, then the question arises, okay, can I program a software which finds these pictures automatically? And secondly, are these really the most significant events during the day, or were there some more significant data or correlations I didn't see in the data? This is what the software does, and I think the main thing what the software does is to search for patterns in the RHE data. And I think it's important to mention that a random event generator, if the materialistic interpretation of the universe would be correct, there must not be any patterns in the random data. It's just not allowed. And the RNGs are built that no classical events like changing temperature, shaking the devices, or whatsoever can influence the production of random numbers, because they are built to produce independent random events. Just to in short, I think it's important. So we have one pattern, both RHEs are leaving the parabola at the same site. Another pattern is one RHE is leaving the parabola up, the other one down. And then I think one is important. This is a so-called stick together anomaly, because this you only can see if you use two RHEs and not one. That means one RHE is not significant. Also, the other is not significant, but both together, because they stick a very long time together, they get significant. That means the mean average distance of the two RHEs gets significant. This would be something like in statistics, you would say this is sensitive to reducing of variation in the RHEs. And then we're looking for the so-called person correlation. I think it's the classical correlation calculation if you have two random numbers. So this is working with random numbers, not with the random walks. And I think now I just show you the software live. So these are actually the data from this Tantra event. And I think the most important thing is, okay, we have now here 24 hours of data. And what we see, we have one very huge peak. We have a second one, which is smaller, but still clearly visible. So the probability that this peak just occurred by chance is 1 to 700,000. This is the height of the peak. Above, slightly above about it. The smaller peak still has a probability of 1 to 100,000 that it did not occur by chance. We will have a deeper look into these two peaks in a minute. This happened during the night, the third biggest peak. Here I don't have any data, and I don't have any clue what is shown here, what are the data reflecting here. But what is interesting, at least these two peaks, if we zoom into the data, this I think is one of the milestones we achieved last year, to have a software which is doing this for us. Oh, this was a little bit too far. So we are zooming into the data. And now we are looking for, at the beginning, we will look now to the first peak. And of course, this is a pattern search algorithm. So we would expect that the starting point, which is found by the software. So it's always important that the height of a peak is only true from one starting point. The starting point of the whole thing is found by the algorithm automatically. And now we look how the pattern, which we look here, looks like if we jump to the pattern the algorithm found. So if we go to the starting point the algorithm found, we see here in the lower line of the Alice and Bob plots, we see the pattern where the algorithm tells us at this point the pattern is starting. And what we see actually, this is the first pattern. So the starting point of the pattern is here. Here we have the pattern, both Alice and Bob go up. Here we have the probability this just occurred by chance. So we have 1 to 100,000. And this is exactly the same picture as we had, which was the lower picture. So the starting point the algorithm found was exactly the same starting point as I typed in or I segmented the data with during a seminar. So this means, A, there is something happened in a group, and an algorithmic approach said, okay, here is the ordered structure and data exactly at the same time with the same beginning time and the, how to say, the time evolvement of the data reflecting in real time what was happening in the seminar room. At least this is what I will show you also later on, which is, I think, a very interesting perspective of the data. Now we go to the second part, the second pattern, main pattern actually. And you see here the pattern which was found, and also the starting point of the pattern was also the same as a manual segmentation I did with the Celeron data. So that means already the first in these 24 hours, we have, if you see it from a materialistic point of view, 2 impossible events. That means that we have 2 peaks which are correlating with the coherence and synchronicity of the group, or with the purpose of meaning that the event had to the group. Yeah, and the starting point found, which is necessary to determine a height in the random data, was exactly the same as the manual segmentation. So basically, when the teacher said, now something is starting, which was in the room, that in the data I see the same starting point. And these are 2 impossibilities already, nearly impossibilities from a materialistic point of view. So you see here just a summary of all of these. So what I showed you in the live plot of the software is the starting point I showed you of the first one was 1, the second one was 3, and 1, 2, 3 other segmentations I did manually during a seminar. That means if you look into the data, we see that the algorithmic approach to the data, so from the data to the event, we got the same result as from the event to the data, which is, I think, a very, very big progress into the viewpoint that we see structures in random data where there should not be any structures. And then, of course, the question arises: can we replicate this? Yes, we can. And actually, this was done already 2 seminars later, and the peak is even higher with a very similar pattern. And again, the starting point was recovered, and we have a probability of 1 to over 800,000 that this just happened by chance. And I think because these are independent events, you can multiply the probabilities and you will immediately see that it goes totally off the line to say, okay, this is just random or luck or whatever. Yeah, okay, the probability for luck is already 1 to some millions or whatever. So this is, I think, from the validation of the method, these are the most, these are very important graphs to show you. And I think, okay, with the blank runs in German hotels, we saw, of course, peaks because random data always show fluctuations, but the magnitude of the height of the peak was by far lower than during this synchronized, meaningful events for the people. So why I would say a map of meaning. So what I then did 1 year, 2 years later is I got the possibility to do an audio recording at the Tantra seminar, and it was fitting the random data I got or the results of my software with the audio recording. And if you look to the whole plot of this Tantra ritual, and I think, as a reminder, these are random walks. There should be no correlation between them. You see just the opposite. You see an hours-long correlation. In this graph, there are 2 types of anomalies combined. So both Alice and Bob leave the parabola, but also they stick together for a very long time. So you have actually this one pattern you see here gets significant, and the other one is the blue one, which is also significant. But I think even for a lay person, it's very obvious that here at this point, the correlation is ending. And then, of course, the question arises, did at exactly this point happen something significant? And yes, exactly at that point, and this is really on a minute, so the maximum of this graph, which is representing the accumulating coherence, it reaches here a maximum at 10 to 10. You see it here reflected in the data pattern. Exactly here the ritual ended. It was a sharp ending. So they did a protection circle, and they closed the protection circle exactly here, and you see it very beautiful in the data. And this is now the plot fitted with the audio. I don't have so much time to go into this, but the interesting thing, I think, what you can see here in all these things is that it seems that the RAG system is showing a live monitoring of the field of consciousness of important events during this Tantra ritual. So what I saw in the data is a meaningful relation between the starting point and the actual and the curves, and the data are following the pattern of the ritual. So these are different, how to say, this was the starting of the ritual, which is has a defined ritual structure. And for example, this was the protection circle. And you see after the period of silence, you had exactly here the maximum of this peak, which is then goes down because something new was starting. Here in these two plots, you have the call of Shiva and Shakti, and you see very beautiful that these data are covering exactly these periods of time. And I think another interesting stuff is if you go deeper into the data analysis, and this again was picked up by the algorithm, not by myself. You see things like self-similar structures in the data. That means, like in this famous Mandelbrot example, you see here the structure of the whole ritual in the RAG data. You take out the calling of Shiva and Shakti, and you see here the same pattern in a much smaller time scale, which I think is a feature of a nested structure, and nested structure, and nested structure, which is very interesting. And I think in the future we will go much deeper into the studying of what we're seeing here. Another interesting point, and I think here I will end my presentation, is that it seems, at least to a certain point, that if you repeat a ritual structure, you're generating similar patterns in the RAG. So this is a ritual in 2019. This was actually the second ritual I was recording. Also with the ending point here, there you see that Alice and Bob are falling apart. And this is the plot I just showed you before, which is basically the same ritual with different people on different places. So same in the sense of the structure of the ritual. And you see a repetition of the patterns. Okay. So I think what we are seeing here is, and I think Peter put this correctly, that we are flooded, so we are part of the field of consciousness. And if we as a group, or a group comes together with a meaningful purpose, our fields, our individual fields are synchronizing. And this is then also synchronizing the output of two RAGs. So thank you very much for your attention. I think we will now come to an interesting discussion.
Lovely. Thanks, Wolf. And I know science might not be everybody's cup of tea and the kind of analysis and things. So just say a moment, just say for a moment, would you, why you feel it's important to do this kind of research into consciousness with the science and things, you know, rather than just kind of have the experience and talk about it. Why do we need to connect up science and consciousness in the way that you're doing? Why is that important?
Okay, I think you have to, as a multi-level answer to that. I think what my standard reply for this question is always like, I think if you want to have something like a modern spirituality in the West, we need something which we can measure. This is one thing. Yeah, I think to have an impact on society, I think so. My dream would be, and we are actually quite close to that, and Wyrd Technologies with you, Peter, and Roger and Carsten, that you have a device which is directly feedbacking you if you get into more coherence or not. Yeah, because this is a direct proof that that the materialist approach is just not the whole picture. It's just a part of the picture. Yeah, how the two relate? I think it's a scientific, very interesting question. But and I think creating this feedback process is the next step, and it's more like spirituality as an experimental science, which I like very much. So I would say personally, I love science since I'm a child. So this is up. The next perspective is then my individual perspective. I think that for me at least, science and consciousness, or the inner experience level and the outer measurement level, or the outer structure level, bringing these two together enormously increases the knowledge about the whole picture. So I think both sides of one big picture, and I think if we want to further develop ourselves in navigating in this, especially in areas of the field of consciousness which are not so familiar to us, I think a measurement device reflecting the deepness of coherence is an important tool to use.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like, I mean, what's so exciting about it is is when you look at the results, which anybody who's a real scientist, right, by which I mean they look at the data, can't deny that something is going on here that our materialist paradigm can't explain. So from a scientific perspective, it's demonstrating a level of interconnectedness, that there is some kind of field that must be connecting us, because how otherwise could individuals or collectives be influencing some kind of device which they have no physical connection to, and which materialist science says shouldn't be able to be influenced by anything physical in the physical world, right? Not electromagnetics, nothing like that should be able to affect these quantum tunneling random effects, random generating effects. So, you know, science is in a way proving itself that the current scientific paradigm, materialist scientific paradigm, is inadequate and isn't expansive enough to be able to take into account the dimensions of reality that we're seeing here. So it may be something that indeed, you know, is more something the Western industrialized, you know, kind of mind needs, but we desperately need that part of the world to make this shift to understanding that there is a dimension of reality in which we are all interconnected, and using the science to help bridge that gap, to open the minds that are at least open. You know, the ones that are closed anyway are always going to be closed, let's say, and we don't want to waste time trying to convince those. But doing proper, you know, grounded research, following accepted protocols that have a good reason for being there, you know, shows that we're taking it seriously. You know, we're not just all having a kind of cool experience and thinking up something to explain why that or how that is. It grounds it in proper serious work, which means that as it becomes grounded, its resonance is also going to be greater in the world.
I think that's an important point. I think the science behind it, behind the device is it's hard science. It's statistics. It's physics, and I mean, I know I met some open materialistic physicists or even open materialists, and I showed them the data, and for them, this was something like a big opening up of their mind. They just said, okay, actually what you're showing here, so they were so surprised and loved the results so much, because it was showing them on a pure hard data science level, that there is something more than they believed before. And I think in many scientists, there is this, how to say, they have something like a secret spirituality, but they do not talk about that, because in the academic world, it's not so popular, and not so they're afraid to talk about it. And I think there are much more scientists around which would love to be, how to say, show their spirituality, and this is actually helping them to do it.
I mean, just to make this very real for people to show what Wolf and the team have been developing, this is the device that's now out there. Todd might actually be on the call, I'm not sure, but that's his device on the left there that that we managed to get shipped to America. The first ones came out in November. Someone has already taken one to the pyramids. Someone had just took one out to sessions with the Dalai Lama, and has been tracking the field there during these different events. So it's very exciting now that we've got the technology to a stage that people can become, citizen scientists in this way, and have their own devices that they can take with them and track, events that are going on, and show how the shifts in the field of consciousness are reflecting their experiences on the ground, are all going to help us to accept that dimension of reality, and to also then learn, well, okay, when we do this in reality, this is what happens in the field of consciousness. Then the kind of learning loop keeps going. Exactly, feedback loops. Thank you, Ji-Yoon. Is exactly what's going on. Because like with, let's say with the HeartMath Institute, and the devices, for years, people have been using them to get feedback on their practices. And now what we have are devices that enable us to get feedback on our collective practices. So what happens when we do a certain thing in a meeting together, or when we do a certain ritual together? What brings coherence into the field of consciousness, and what drops the coherence in the field of consciousness? We start to get that level of feedback, like we have biofeedback at the biological and individual level. When we start to bring that level of feedback in at the collective level, it's going to start people asking, oh, well, what is it that we need to do more collectively and consciously to positively affect and create the coherence in the field? Because the more coherence that we create, the more the probability of our intentions manifesting, and the more likely the decisions that we're taking are going to be ones which have a positive effect, and an effect that are going to bring something into manifestation. So it's really exciting to see all of this developing. Part of the next stage, I know, with the Wyrd Technologies, is to create a small device that can be embedded in lamps, for example, or in toys. So people can be influencing the lamps, or kids can have toys that they can influence with their minds. So suddenly, kids aren't taught this stuff in school. They're going to be having these toys that they can play with and see. And kids are much better at this than adults, by the way. Make this little robot move across the room purely with their intention, or make a lamp turn color with their intention. They're going to be going back to school going like, teacher, how does that work? Because they know it works. But our normal education isn't teaching people this kind of aspect of reality. So it's pretty exciting, I think, the way that it's going. And I put a link in, by the way, to the chat to the Wyrd website. So if you want to stay in touch around that, feel free to put the sign up to the newsletter there. There are some devices available. They'll be available more, I think, to a larger number of people come the summer or so. But with the first 20 or 30 are now kind of getting out there into the world, which is really exciting, because we'll be collecting all of that data, of course, and looking at it and analyzing it. And the software you can use yourself now to start to see these patterns in the data. So it's my sense that there is a whole kind of sector emerging in the field of consciousness technology that is just going to radically change our mindsets. The psychoactive effect of having a device that you can influence with. I mean, I've got my old Celeron mind lamp here on the table, and it responds and kind of starts to glow when certain key things are said. But to have kids playing with toys, or we had they also developed something at Princeton where I can't remember if Roger mentioned this, but where they had an animal feed, a pet feeder that was driven by the intention of the animal, you know. So as it kind of got its coherence together, it learned to be able to unlock the feeder so that the pet food would drop out. Or the experiment they did with the plants, which is so exciting, where the plants regulated the light themselves by interacting with these REGs. So it's just going to force us to ask so many questions, you know, and bring this inquiry into our education systems as these technologies come into the world, and people have to kind of get to grips with how does this work? Because nobody taught me about this. So what I'd like to just spend a few minutes exploring with everyone, and Rollin, feel free to join us again, is what is some of the possibilities that you see, you know, in the future as we kind of, you know, we've kind of thrown ourselves in at the deep end, as it were, with the GCP technology, with the Wyrd technology, and finding all sorts of things. But when we really think about the implications of human consciousness affecting devices with there being no physical connection between people, the power of groups being reflected through feedback mechanisms, all these kind of things. I mean, we allow our imagination to roam a little bit, what are some of the implications of all of this, some of the possibilities that you might see in the future? Rollin, Wolf.
Well, that's a multi-level, I think, kind of a question. It's a great question. I mean, just on the reason that I got involved with the GCP data was, as far as I know, it's from a scientific perspective, probably the only, or certainly the best tool we have for, you know, a truly global collective consciousness measuring. And kind of a saying that came out of the Global Coherence Initiative work, even before we got this became a new tool in our toolbox, is becoming aware. It's helping people become aware of what we're feeding the field. And with the motive of help, once we do that, then we become almost automatically more responsible for the vibrations or the energies we're feeding the field. Because our real goal at HeartMath is and always has been really helping facilitate the shift in global consciousness, or the baseline consciousness of humanity, another way of saying it, to where we really do elevate consciousness globally. That's from my perspective, Peter, the only thing that's going to get us out of the problems we have. You know.
So you mean, so kind of, Rollin, one of the key things being the realization that our inner states are affecting the world around us. You know, that fundamental realization. Therefore, it's about time we start taking responsibility, right, for our thoughts and the emotions we're putting out there.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yes, I mean, because what not only GCP too, but some of our other projects, like we also have a global tree project where we're measuring the electrical activity of trees all around the world. You know, so we don't just have physical devices like RNGs, which clearly I think we have to, you know, I like what you said earlier. If you're a real scientist, you have to say, wow, this is real, right? We are somehow interacting, but also living systems. So that's why we're doing the tree project. And then we also have another project, part of the Global Coherence Initiative, where we have magnetometer sites all around the Earth. So we're measuring literally the magnetic field environment and the vibrations, the resonant frequencies, and how those are interacting with our physiology and our behaviors as well, our consciousness. Yeah. So we're really trying to look at it from a lot of angles, all with the motive and the goal of helping people become aware of how interconnected we truly are through these energetic and fields that we live in and that we radiate. And you mentioned biofeedback. So what I think the data is starting to show more and more is that it truly is a giant biofeedback system that we live in. That our consciousness, as you know, as a collective, is interacting with the Earth itself and with us, but it's bidirectional. Clearly, the fields we live in affect us. There's no question of that. There's so many studies on that. But we're also affecting the information being affected in the field. And the reason I think that one of the things I talked about, Peter, was that small groups can really pulse the field with more coherence. That actually can help lift the global consciousness field. So people that don't even, that consciousness isn't even in their vocabulary. I mean, so I hear a lot of, there's two camps sort of that emerge from this kind of work. One is, I don't need technology to meditate, and I don't need any of this kind of stuff to know that we're all interconnected. Well, great, that you're more, that's fantastic. But there's a whole bigger group of humanity that doesn't know that doesn't even believe that. It's not even in their thoughts. So that's why we do a lot of the science and the research is, and there's a lot of people on the bubble, so to speak, that need the scientific confirmation for them to, think a little deep, maybe go, that's interesting. Maybe I should pay a little more attention to this. Ultimately, we have to start making better choices. So I think what we feed the field and the energetic environment we live in is critical for the shift in consciousness, but it also has to get practical, kind of, sky to street, down here on earth, that we start making better choices, better decisions, more inclusive in our choices and what we choose to do.
I mean, one of the most exciting projects that I know about related to that is around football or soccer in the UK, where Northampton University, together with a man who's very much involved in the football world in the UK, have acquired 3 of the Wyrdoscope devices, and they're going to be taking them into football stadiums and tracking what happens to the devices, so to the field of consciousness during the games. One of the early prototypes we did is they took an early device in and sent us back the data, and Wolf sent the data back saying, well, this is where I would have expected things to happen. He knew nothing about which game it was going to. We probably didn't even know which sport it was, but then they took it in. He said here, here, and here, and they said, oh, well, that's when the goals were scored. So if we can, so the first interesting thing is football crowds realizing that the way they are responding collectively is having some effect, is measurable, like in the field. So that starts a conversation, right? But when you take it to a next level, like you were saying, small groups being able to affect the field, then could crowds consciously start to affect the probability of things affecting, happening on the pitch? So you then end up potentially with football fans wanting to learn about the intention. And of course, what we know about intention is that it can't be kind of anger or aggression driven to get the result. It's heart-based. There's a lack of attachment. You have to feel a sense of connection. It's not an either or. And the ones that are most effective might have the biggest effect kind of on the pitch and increase the probabilities of their team winning. So when you start to get this kind of experience into things like football crowds, then you're starting to reach a very different audience. So how you frame the communication and all of those kind of things, but just the realization that, okay, there's something that can measure the field that the crowd creates in a stadium with there being no physical connection between it. Just that, opens up a whole inquiry in a part of society, let's say, that might never have been exposed to any of this before. So, Wolf, what about you? I mean, you've kind of been involved in this, exploring this for so many years. You must sometimes allow your mind to wander and think about some of the possibilities.
Yeah, of course. I think so. What I said before was right to the bottom. I think is already the next steps we foresee. But I think of course you can dream. Yeah, you can dream about a lot of fantastic ideas. And I think one for me is, I think synchronicity itself. So synchronicities itself have a very fascinating structure. And I think this is my link to the possible extraterrestrial technology. I think synchronicities, it's so if you have something like an organizational closure, which would be, for example, either a place or a ritual or whatever. I think that inside such a closure, synchronicities can look like signals. But the nice thing is these signals have different properties than our usual electromagnetic signals. And I think the most important property is that they occur simultaneously. So they need not the speed of light to travel. So I'm not so surprised actually that what Jim told before, and you were telling me before, that the technology is based on consciousness. So it's based on synchronicities. Synchronicities in a closure can work like signals. We to hell don't know how you can build a closure and then travel through space with it. I think we are in this case, we're just, how to say, in Galvani's time when he said, okay, this is electricity, when he saw the frog moving, when he stimulated it with ancient battery. But I think I'm not surprised on that. And I think, so my dreams are, of course, far in the future. And I think every bit we can find out and all kinds of variations, intuitions, and ideas we can have might give us a clue for a bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture is that humans really learn something completely new for them as a whole humankind. And I think what Rollin said, I think, yes, of course, from the time now, it's important that that more and more people realize what we fit into the field of global consciousness. But I also think we might learn to develop technologies far beyond everything we know at the moment, which are intertwined with our inner development. I think that's very important, and I think that's very Arrow is pointing to for me. Yeah, the next step in technology, if it's based on synchronicities, it's automatically that our inner consciousness is intertwined with the outer technology. But as I said, these are just ideas. So I don't have a device at home which can do this for me, but I would love to.
I mean, one of the interesting things that you've been exploring in the more recent research is not just the quantity of effect, the way something deviates from randomness or the coherence between the data lines, but also starting to notice, are there qualities in the data? By which means, for example, is there an energetic or informational thumbprint of a particular Tantra ritual?
Yeah.
Does a particular piece of music have an energetic information signature to it? So though the data lines look slightly different for different entities, let's say, things with a closure, a beginning and an end, a ritual, a piece of music, or something, which is just fascinating. So can we see that there are different that we can describe things energetically, as it were. So just as they manifest in the material realm, we see a reflection of them in the information fields or in the consciousness.
That's a good point, Peter. I think you're referring to my lecture in Broughton. I think yes, if you look to we can look to the data I just presented you now. So there is that 3D matrix behind that, and you just see the selection of the algorithm. But if you look to the whole matrix, it might be, that you really see a fingerprint of a certain event. But this is just at the moment, it's just an idea with a nice evidence for it, of course, if I'm saying it's an idea. But I think this might be also a very interesting area. But I think in 1 year, we might know much more about exactly this.
Yeah. I mean, also related, Rollin, to the GCP, you said the network registers something just before it manifests in the material world. I wonder, 2 points really. One, whether we can get more refinement on the data so that we can actually pick up the signal earlier than we are at the moment, because for now it's literally just a few seconds, I think, isn't it? Or maybe a couple of minutes.
No, in our case, a day ahead of time.
A day, was it? A day ahead. Okay. Well, that's interesting that it's a day ahead now, because I know for the 9/11 data, it was literally just a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
because obviously the earlier.
Yeah, when I say that, I don't mean event specific. What we're seeing kind of a leading edge of the looking across the years. this is current analysis that's going on right now, is in measures of global sentiment or mood, which then drives stock markets and things like that. In fact,
well, you then have potentially an early warning system, of some kind. And if we can then add this second point that I was just talking to Wolf about, a qualitative aspect, so that you get a signal starting to come on, but you can also see a certain quality in the data, right? So that is an informational fingerprint of an earthquake, for example. That it seems like all the times there've been earthquakes, we get this data.
Yeah. Well,
and you can then locate. Then it becomes useful at another level.
Right.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. I think in terms of like the 9/11 data, where there was a huge response hours before that event and before earthquakes and some of the larger earthquakes in the GCP data. The problem is, and maybe this, if we get more of a larger network like we're doing in GCP2, that can get more localized. Because you see something might happen, but you have no idea where. In terms of earthquakes, I mentioned we're doing a global tree project. Well, there's fairly compelling data there because we're doing that more for the energetic interconnectivity reasons. But there's also some of our collaborators that have shown, because trees have their root system into the earth, right, that there are changes in the electrical currents within the earth that are much more localized that precede earthquakes. That, we can potentially see there as another type of energetic or electrical phenomenon.
Wow. And maybe in these informational imprints, there might be a geolocation kind of aspect to it.
Yeah.
Who knows? Okay, well, we're running out of time now, so I want to bring Jim back in. Jim, any thoughts from your side or questions like related to the UAP thing or any other inspirations that have come to you during this session?
Well, first, it's so good to have you back on the program, both of you, Wolf and Rollin. The work that you're doing is so cutting edge. And I think that the comment that I would make is around the deep, synchronicity between what you were doing and, the coherence project, Rollin, that HeartMath has been participating in for so many years, the monthly meditations and all the work that is now being conducted around humanity's burgeoning awareness of the porousness of consciousness and the way that consciousness affects the objective world, right at the same moment that humanity's coming into its ET epoch and encountering beings that communicate normally with what we humans still consider extrasensory perception. And that's a very exciting thing, because all these aspects of research and participation by people all around the world are now going to enable humanity to communicate with these beings much more easily. I was looking at a video just the other day, and this is what I would love to have you comment on. It was by a Russian scientist, and he was doing research in remote viewing. And his assertion at that time, back in the 1980s, was that this was not a unique phenomenon that, only the most gifted people could develop. And what he did is he went out into the villages and just encountered people shopping or driving around or walking with their children, and just randomly brought people together. And he found that everybody has this faculty. His data showed that women have it slightly more easily accessible than men, and children more accessible than adults. But the one thing that he began to note is that as people refine their capacity for remote viewing that they naturally begin to experience encounters with other intelligences in their psyche and mind. So that this is apparently a faculty that just opens one up naturally to ET communication and encounter. Because as the people in his study began to get better and better at it, they began to report extraordinary incidences at night or when they were walking around the neighborhood, and they were just starting to be in communication with non-human intelligences, just as a byproduct almost of the kind of discipline that they were engaged in. So I would love to have both of you comment on this relationship between what you're exploring and the ET phenomenon and communicating, because that's now what humans are going to do. And as you both heard, this is the training program that we're launching today with the new Paradigm Institute, is just to enable people. And it's my hope that we can get the HeartMath Institute involved in this, and Wolf, your institute, so that we can make this available to the larger world public, but within the context of facilitating communication with extraterrestrials.
Okay, I'll take a shot here. I'm gonna ground it a little more though, Jim, if that's okay.
Sure.
Not that why, but the Earth, and then in that we did. Well, let me start just by saying this. One of the things we hear most from people who learned how to increase their heart coherence and make that kind of more of a way of life in day-to-day life, is that their intuition is noticeably taking a jump, like on steroids. I hear that term a lot. And the second thing that comes out of their mouth is, and synchronicities have become a way of life, right? So but spent a couple of years really doing some pretty hardcore lab-based studies on what I do. My first publications on it, I called them the electrophysiology of intuition. So to summarize this, what I'm going to say here, there's what our research and that of many others that have done work on this type of thing is I've suggested there are 3 types of intuition. I won't go into all that now. We could do a show sometime on that, or a discussion. And the standard type that most study in academia is implicit learning, implicit these types of things, which is an important part. Energetic sensitivity is another one, and that's our nervous system's capacity to receive very real, often measurable signals from others or the environment, and how we've learned to respond to those. We call it intuition. And then the third type is non-local intuition. And like how do mothers know when their kids are doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, or in harm's way on the other side of the city or the planet, right? I mean, this is so common of an experience. It's part of the GCI research and why we're doing the magnetic field environment, because I believe that gives us a very plausible mechanism that explains so much of this, including remote viewing in some ways, of how we pull information from the field. And what our research suggests is what tunes us to the information of interest out of the field is what we care about. Who we care about. It's really that connection. And in fact, a lot of the talks I've been giving this last year are titled "How Love Connects Us," because we see this manifest in physiological synchronization as well. It's kind of amazing what we're starting to see now in terms of these type of non-local effects. And I'll give you an example. And I think this goes on a lot for children. Like my own son went back until he was about 3. If he learned to talk, he would come in and talk about, the gnome or the being in the tree is talking about X tree being sick and that we need to do something to help it. Right. So how many kids have that kind of experience that as adults, your imaginary friend and all this stuff? Well, you go check, and sure enough, the tree is exactly like what his little buddy said. And, and this was kind of common. We, in our family, we didn't, tell him he was crazy. Okay, let's go look at the tree, right? And that went away after about 3, something like that. So there's, I think, an example of the kind of communication you're talking about with ETs, but some, and actual beings that are here on Earth that are just living in a different energetic, or I think of them as different dimension of density. They're vibrational beings that, are probably here all around us. In another dimension that we can learn to communicate with. Right. A lot of people talk to trees, right? For example. In fact, I've had 2 different independent people contact me and say, "Oh yeah, I talk to trees." And they wanted you to know that they're really aware of your project to measure trees and show how humans interact, connected with them. And they're very supportive, So why not extend those capacities to ETs? I mean, does it make sense what I'm trying to say here? I mean,
Sure.
From my perspective, of course they're ETs. I mean, you look at the stars, and to think we're the only life that the universe would create that, and all the trillions of planets that are out there. I mean, come on. How arrogant are we to think we're the only, or the pinnacle of technology or our consciousness in the universe? Anyway, that's one perspective on it.
Well, it's just to comment on this and then hear from you, Wolf, is that you're making a really important point that we're hearing more and more about, that interspecies communication generally is conducive to and for ET communication. In other words, if you're communicating with trees, or you're a horse whisperer, or you're really in touch with your dogs or your cats, any kind of non-human communication with non-human sentience increases one's natural capacity for any kind of sentience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that point. Yeah. Wolf, what would be your comment on these matters? Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. So thank you, Roland. I think you already pointed out, I think, the most important part. So from my point, it's the same. If you look to the universe, we know that ETs are there. I think everything else is just a stupid assumption. On the other hand, I think if they're on Earth, I mean, it would be, as I said the last time, I would love to meet one, and then to look, because I think if they really can cross space, if they can cross the universe, they must be far ahead of our technology and all this, really far ahead. And then the question is, of course, okay, how such a meeting would be. I think, okay, if they can communicate telepathically and or heart to heart or something like that, would be very interesting. And then I think the only thing what we could do from the technology part of view, take some of our devices, place them there and look what they are doing during we are communicating, and look if you can see something on the devices. Maybe we could translate something or whatever. Yeah. So we might find some imprints on our devices, which say, okay, this is typical for this kind of communication. Just one idea. And of course, I would love to discuss with such an IT about all these synchronicity aspects and how they travel. And if I would have 100,000 of questions to a possible extraterrestrial space traveler, would be. I'm so curious.
Yeah.
Next time we're at Wolf, we'll all tune in, and there are some kind of protocols or practices for inviting them to a conversation. So we'll go up to the old bronze stone circle, and we'll sit there and we'll invite them to chat.
Yeah. Well, what I would emphasize is just the point that you're making too, Wolf. It's important for all of us to be very humble in the realization that we're just really beginning this endeavor. And we have 100,000 questions. And part of what we're wanting to do in this extraterrestrial studies program is build partnerships like with HeartMath Institute, and we're in discussion with various other institutes so that we can start to collaborate together in a deep spirit of inquiry, and what we say at Ubiquity, truth pursued, not truth possessed, so that as this training program begins to unfold, we identify not the answers, but what are the right questions that we humans need to be asking at this moment about this extraordinary phenomenon. And so having both of you and others involved with us is, I think, the beginning of an extraordinary odyssey, because as far as we know, this extraterrestrial studies program is the first of its kind in history. And so there's a lot that we can do together in the spirit of humble inquiry. So, Peter, as the convener, do you want to make a sort of a final comment on our 5 days together, and then we'll bring this session to a close?
Ooh. No, nothing really. I mean, I think, for me, it's been of all these practitioners and all these researchers coming together, the one thing that echoes through all of them is the importance of the embodiment of the state of unity consciousness, of interconnectedness, of oneness, and it's getting beyond the kind of false illusion of separation. That is what enables information and things to flow through these fields of consciousness. And I think having the research, good, proper, open-minded research there, as you say, we're right at the beginning, can help us to learn how to be effective at doing that. What's getting in the way? What the hell is this field anyway? We call it, what do we call it? The Akashic field, or morphogenetic fields, or we just have terms and language, but we actually have no idea how it works or what it's composed of. And, good open-minded researchers who understand that it's our inner consciousness is an intrinsic part of this field itself, that you can't actually separate them. How do you research that? And what's the science of the subjective, as Jeff called it at the beginning of the week? I think there's a huge domain there, which I'm excited for us to explore at Ubiquity and further. So yeah, exciting times.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rollin and Wolf. In some ways, you are the giants upon which we little dwarfs sit, the shoulders of your extraordinary research and foundational exploration, I would say, for this new era of human history. So I want to acknowledge both of you and thank you for your pioneering work. And Rollin, I'm going to be in touch about a presentation on Humanity Rising on the different types of intuition. That's totally what's up, man, for humanity. And Wolf would be glad to have you back as well. So that will bring us to a close for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom reminder for the call today. And then next week, we'll embark on a series of equally interesting dimensions of new consciousness in our world as humanity seeks to save itself, as it teeters on the brink of self-destruction, with the kind of renewal as science and consciousness merge to illuminate the human mind and heart and soul. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peter. Bye for now.